Hey, Mark, are you there?
Hey,
Hey, Mark,
how's it
welcome. How
going?
are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It's a rainy day in Atlanta.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you do on rainy days to get yourself going?
Actually, I like the rain, so it doesn't necessarily slow me down, but with this being like a tea time session, I got my Earl Grey here, which is really nice. So that's been nice.
Earl Grey tea always makes me think of Captain Picard on Star Trek Next Generation. Did you watch that show?
A little bit. Uh I'm not like very well versed in Star Trek, but I've seen like a little bit of it. So yeah.
You would always walk up to the simulator and say, tea, Earl Grey, hot.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah, I always say, because I'm kind of a fan of the bald and the beautiful look.
Yeah.
So I would say I'm looking for a guy who's Picard up top, Riker down below.
That's funny.
Yeah. Um, so you have a cup of Earl Grey. Is that your morning routine typically, or what, do you mix it up?
Most yeah, I think I'm pretty consistent with the Earl Grey, I'd say. I'll switch it up on occasion, but if I'm doing tea in the morning, that'll be my go-to. Yeah, what about yourself?
Well, I'm actually typically in the morning a decaf coffee with oat milk girl.
Gotcha.
Tea is typically my afternoon situation.
Cool. Well,
But since I've created this whole metaphor of tea and jam with me, I'm having tea more often with people. I got to have tea live the other day, not live as in live on the interwebs, but in real time with our friend Sarah Zurich Brown, who's back in town, to enjoy the Oakland Cemetery tours.
yeah.
So it was really fun to have a real-time tea with a person, a live human being, and to talk about the pleasures of a proper pot of tea.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm really enjoying this whole tea thing. Although with this week's troubling political events, I started thinking about the colonialism of tea and the politics of tea in that way. I mean, tea is a really rich metaphor. I'm going to like milk it to death from now until whenever this project is over.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense.
So, Mark, as you know, this project is my public research, or this part of the project is my public research for this show that I'm doing that's called I'm a Little Teapot. It has a longer subtitle that we won't get into, but it's all about my journey with my sense of purpose. And the 4 tenets of the project are purpose, possibility, passion, and power. And so I'm wondering if you would be willing to talk with us about your own journey with what you've learned about yourself from the working world. So I actually have been thinking a lot about how we learn lessons from our younger selves, which got me thinking about these old-fashioned fortune tellers. Did you play with these when you were a kid?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So I got to playing with one of these. Next thing I'm going to do is remind myself how to make an 80s version of texting, which is a note.
Yeah.
Remember how we used to like fold up pieces of paper and into those very intricate like locking note systems?
Yeah.
That's going to be my next project. But for today, pick a number from 1 to 8.
7.
Okay. Purpose. So tell us a story that has to do with yourself and what you learned about yourself and your sense of purpose.
That's a great question. Sense of purpose. I'll pick something maybe like recent within the past couple of years. So with my friend Bill, we have a production company called Cool Productions. And so we create content using comedy to address things like civic engagement, racial justice, community building. And so the for me, the most exciting moments of that work is when we get to partner with an organization that's doing something really exciting, really good. And I feel that we are able to help support that work with using comedy to help communicate whatever it is that they're trying to do. So, for example, in the past, we've worked with Fair Count to educate their community on, gerrymandering, but more specifically how to fight against it, or work we've done in the past with New Georgia Project to encourage voting, and using comedy as a way to make it, again, something that you hopefully want to engage in, as opposed to being like depleted by, like, just the whole process of politics that we, mentioned earlier. And so those moments where I feel I get to collaborate with other people and sort of like bring something to the table in some way to kind of like help foster that collaboration. Those are moments when I feel like a sense of purpose, a feeling of community. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I agree. It makes so much sense that comedy would be like the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down, right?
Yeah.
Can you is there an example of a time when you feel like you could see how you're like helping move the needle or change somebody's mind or like show success behind the work?
Sure. I mean, I think in the most like simple terms, it's like when a video gets viewed a lot or shared a lot or goes viral. Like, that's probably the most immediate, way that we see that. But also too, is just like we do a lot of stuff specifically local to Atlanta. And so it's nice when you're walking around and just meet people in public or strangers that you don't know. And they're like, oh, I saw the video about whatever and it was helpful. And you're like, oh, that's nice. Cool. Yeah.
I mean, they are really funny and you're using really great metaphors. I agree, very successful in that way.
Thanks.
So on the flip side, I always feel like I learned the most about myself from a time when I failed. Like, are you willing to tell us about a failure that you feel like you've experienced in some time?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think that's pretty regular. I'm working on, like, I try to always work on new content, new material. Like I do like a lot of solo sketch comedy, and stand up. And so this year I've been trying to like build up new material for new projects and things like that. So part of my process in doing that is to travel, to go on the road, to go someplace that's not Atlanta, to get the material up in front of people that may not necessarily know me or whatever, just to see how it lands. And so it's been a humbling experience going to cities where maybe a couple of years before I was there with something more polished, and people might remember me from that. And then I come back with this new thing that's still rough and not polished yet. And, a lot of it falls flat on its face. And so that it doesn't like feel good in the moment, but also I'm heartened by it because it's just like, well, that's a necessary step to eventually get to the place where you have something that does work. And I feel like that's like a lot of comedy in general, where it's just like, hopefully you can be in a place where you can, in a productive way, like fail a lot, because that usually means that you're on the right track, hopefully.
That's such a nice way to think about it. I feel like a lot of people are just always wanting to feel successful no matter what, and they're really hard on themselves. And I love that you're seeing like it's just moving you forward. I was listening to a podcast the other day that it was mostly for writers, and they were talking about the problem with people taking that or feeling so self-critical in that way, is that they're constantly comparing their rough draft to other people's like highly edited published work that's gone through like a million processes and other people's criticism and everything, and they're viewing that in compared to like their what Anne Lamott calls shitty first draft. And it's just like apples and oranges. So I'm sure you probably had a million careers before you got to this place. Can you tell us about what was the worst job you ever had? Like are you like me? Like, did you have like a bunch of different things, or did you go straight to comedy?
I've been doing stuff that's like comedy related or storytelling related for a while, but I've had like weird jobs within that, as well as other like odd side gigs, so I've done like a lot of gigs where I've like gone someplace to teach an improv workshop or gone someplace to do a show, and just like all kinds of weird places that are not meant for comedy at all, and so like a gig will be doomed from the start. But again, like as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't feel good when you're in that moment, but then right after it, you're just like, oh, well, that was kind of a nice experience because now I learned that and I'm not surprised by it anymore. So like, I mean, I was doing a challenging gig last week where I'm just like, oh, we have not been set up for success, but because I've been in that situation so many times, it's just like I can make the best of it and not necessarily be freaked out by it. One gig that I like to reference that was, just kind of weird. It was cool, but like the execution was weird.
Yeah.
It was an improv gig, and so I was doing it with several other of my improv friends, and so we were hired to like be the performers for this art installation. So it was part of an arts festival, and it was a really interesting project. It was around the fight for 15, so like bumping up the minimum wage at the time. So this would have been like maybe like 10 years, or I forget, 7-8 years ago, let's say, I don't know, about like bumping up the minimum wage to $15. So the fight for 15. So we were hired to be fast food, dressed up as fast food characters, representing like, so like someone dressed up as Wendy's, someone dressed up as the Colonel from KFC. And they set up this large inflatable wrestling rink, kind of like American Gladiator style, where he's standing up on a platform opposing another audience. We had like these big like swinging like batons basically, and so the setup was, it was literally like a fight for 15. So anyone just walking down the street, and it was like this blocked off part of Edgewood where people were just walking up and down Edgewood seeing all these different arts pieces. And so you could walk up to this inflatable wrestling rink, pay some money, and then fight one of these fast food mascots. And so it was kind of like the fight for 15. And so then if you won, you got your money back or something like that. And so I was like the referee, and then a lot of my improv friends were dressed like as these fast food characters. And just from the start, like it just didn't really work very well, just because it's like they're in costume and they're just getting bashed by these random people. And then it started to rain, and then like the inflatable rink like fell over several times, and it was like this really big structure. The artist that put the whole thing together understandably got frustrated, and he left for like several hours. Another one of the improvisers were like, I'm kind of done with this, so they quit. So that was our MC. So I started MC and refereeing, and we're on this like inflatable rink, you know what I mean? So it's just like your back kind of gets sore because you don't have like the best support. And this was just going on for like hours and hours. And we were going through the rain and the dark, all this stuff. And it was just one of those gigs where it's just like, what's happening? What are we doing? And then I remember like the next day I was talking to some people about it, and they're like, I mean, are you glad you did it? Would you do it again? We were like, yeah, probably. Yeah, it was fine. But that was kind of one of the more unique ones, and not like the worst job I ever had, but just sort of like a weird gig, so.
Unideal circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how once you get through it, it's like, well, I learned something. I wouldn't maybe choose this, but I think that's one of the things that about, I think a lot of times people, they edit themselves out of things because they're like, oh, that would be so terrible. I don't ever want to experience that. like, I know it, even like you think about in therapy, you like go through, I'm not trying to project like you've been in therapy. I know when I've been in therapy and a person like will try to like walk you through like the worst case scenario, and it's like, and then what happens? And then like, because like the story you tell in your mind about what it would be like if this like horrible thing would happen. And it's just like, and then I would just like fall through the floor. And that's not what happens. The world doesn't come to an end, you know, you get through it. Like, and I think that's the thing, like, we tend to be like, it would be the worst thing ever, but really it's like, it wasn't ideal, I wouldn't have chosen it, but I got through it, and actually, you know, I learned something, right? I think that that's the thing. When I was trying to imagine myself as a storyteller years ago, like literally decades before I ever really put pen to paper and thought maybe I could become a storyteller, I was always being asked to be a kid storyteller at like crafts fairs and stuff when I worked at the YMCA. And that was the literal worst, because they never had an actual stage or like an area for it. They would be like, tell kids stories like in the middle of the crafts fair, you know? And so I'd be like here next to this little like placard with the easel,
Yeah.
and the kids would be across the aisle because there was no room for it. And then people would be walking through where I was telling. So I'd be like yelling the story about Herman the salamander in the middle of this like open gymnasium area. It was like so hard. It was like, and I would make it through and I'd be like, well, that was not ideal, you know, terrible performance environment. Didn't love that. The world didn't come to an end, and it had nothing to do with whether or not I was a good performer, you know? Yeah. What do you feel like you've learned about yourself from work?
It's a good question. What I've learned about myself. I think I've learned that I appreciate like the community aspect, not so much of like work necessarily, but like the importance of community like in my life, you know. So I think I've learned that. I think I've learned a lot about collaboration, like I referenced earlier, like, you know, collaborating with other organizations doing cool things. So like the idea of collaborating, meaning like you don't have to know how to do everything to like help contribute to something, you know. So it's just like you can just kind of bring a piece of the puzzle, or like, I don't know, like a dish to the meal or whatever. So I think I've learned about like collaboration and listening in that way. Yeah, so I think just kind of like the effectiveness of like group work when it's done well, but making sure that there is a proper environment in place for collaboration. And without the proper environment for collaboration, it's not really worth it, you know. So
I mean, what do you think are what is the proper environment for collaboration? What do you think sets us up for that?
Yeah, I think you know, a lot of times when groups come together, you know, unless there's work to be done where it's just like, hey, we're going to set up an environment where everyone's going to be heard. We're not going to judge like people trying to come up with new ideas. So this is a space where we can be vulnerable with each other to brainstorm and experiment. Those kind of like basic things. Otherwise, I think you run into situations where it's the same type of people dominating conversation, and then the same kind of people being ignored all the time. And then you don't come up with anything very creative or very innovative.
So it's so hard though, because there are really people who are pretty dominant personalities and others who have a tendency to hang back. And I think it comes down to a role that we tend to discount, which is a good facilitator, somebody who can be really helpful noticing that and pulling out those who tend to hang back. I noticed on one of your Instagram stories, you were talking about a character who thought they were the main character.
Oh,
And it made me think about this whole meme that's happening right now about main character energy. So I wondered if you would talk about main character energy and that particular character that you're playing.
Yeah, so that so the reel you're referencing is some friends of mine are starting a Kickstarter for a cartoon that they have developed called Super Dudes. And so it's this thing that they've done independently where they've developed this superhero world, and one of the characters that I would voice is like a sidekick character in the story that they're developing. And so as a joke, when they were doing behind the scenes videos profiling these different characters, I just thought it would be fun if I just didn't give any actual information about the show and just said the opposite of what the show was about. So I'm a sidekick, I'm a minor character. So I said, oh, I'm the main character in the show. It's like a superhero comedy. I said it was like a period piece in the vein of Barry Lyndon. So just like at every moment where I could inform the viewer or help them raise funds, I did the opposite of that in an effort to make it more enjoyable. And so that's kind of what that was. So yeah. But in terms of main character energy, I think that I think it's funny. You know, I feel like a lot of some types of comedy I think are very funny when you have someone that is just like blissfully unaware of, you know, how others see them, you know. So the idea of someone that is, at least in the instance of this, you know, show that my friends are developing, someone that's very explicitly like a sidekick, you know, but they're like, no, I'm not, you know, like I think that flip is funny. So yeah.
Well, and it's funny in, you know, in comedy and in the things that we're putting out there in terms of content, but like how it translates into our lives is that we really are the main characters in our own lives. And I feel like it's an empowering state to be in, like we are the main characters. And it's also important as we sort of have to think about the way that we have constructed, like I'm always trying to challenge the word marginalized, because a person is only marginalized if we think of ourselves as the center, right? So I think it's really interesting, this notion of main character energy, and I'm wanting to play with that a lot. So I appreciated your use of it in that moment.
Fun.
Okay, so I have this random number generator, different because we need more numbers than 8. So pick a number from 1 to 75.
75.
Oh, that's the number you're picking?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then don't need the generator. Tell us a story about yourself at the age of 75.
Oh, myself at the age of 75. You know, hopefully, or no, I mean, I don't know. I enjoy, it would be nice if I was someplace having some good food, not really doing a whole lot, but maybe hanging out with my friends and brainstorming what we were going to make next. And that's all I did all day. So,
so you're still going to be making amazing things. I love it. Do you have any questions for me?
I do. Yeah. What are you working on, like for yourself as like a storyteller or writer that you're most excited about? Or is there a project that maybe you'd like to start that you haven't yet that you're excited about?
Well, so this project is the biggest, most ambitious, like Shannon just gets to tell a story thing that I have ever done. I've spent the last 7 years of my storytelling practice going all over helping other people tell their stories. And it's not been lost on me that I haven't spent much time working on my own craft. And sometimes I've been telling myself a story, which is that I'm a better story coach than I am a storyteller. So I finally, I got so self-conscious about that. I was like, well, the only way I'm going to dig myself out of this hole is to just work on it. And somewhere in the pandemic, these stories about this very specific time in my life when I had just had a string of jobs, my early 20s, when I was wandering through life. And I think the reason why it was happening during the pandemic was because they kept talking about the Great Resignation and how it seemed like people a little bit lost. It feels like we're kind of under a bit of a malaise. So I just was feeling resonance with that time, both for me personally and for the at the macro level. So I started, pulling out strands of those stories. And the thing that's interesting about it is that I have the ideas about what the performance is going to be. And I keep saying it's going to be me telling these stories. And yet what I've actually done is started creating workshops and, these conversations, and I haven't actually started working on the show itself. So I think I'm still a little bit hiding. But I'm sure. So I've got a big week next week where I'm going to be going and filming stories for the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities. And I think once we come back from that week, I'm going to feel more able to concentrate on this project again. And I'm pretty excited about it. So we'll see.
That's great. And how's it felt like, you talked about previous 7 years coaching more, now focusing more so on yourself as a storyteller. How's that shift felt creatively?
It feels really good. It also still feels pretty scary. Like, how can I, convince people to come out to a show that's something like this, especially when there's so many other important stories to pay attention to right now. But I'm really conceiving of this show to be something that's very interactive and still very much about all of our sense of purpose and passion and power and potential. Have you by any chance seen that amazing magic show where the guy is doing autobiography, but also it's called In and of Itself?
Yeah, I love that special. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of imagining it being a little bit like that, where I get somebody to come up out of the audience and talk to me, or that there'll be story circles that happen in the middle of the show. It's going to be in the liminal space of the audience of the lobby, that there'll be, places for people to be drawing and different things. So I think it's going to be a very full and fun experience. So it's still not going to be just me telling stories. So I feel we sing this song at Alternate Roots, the arts and social justice organization that I'm a part of. That says, I'm awake, aware, alive, enthusiastic. And that's how I feel right now. In normal times for me, my house is very put together. I'm cleaning and organizing all the time. And right now my house is a mess. It's trash. There's stuff piled up all over the place. I'm got these bottles that I got out of the woods that I'm going to use for a message in a bottle workshop. And I've got costumes pulled out everywhere. I'm just full of art right now. And that feels a little bit chaotic and sometimes nerve-wracking, but also a really great place to be in.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is very exciting. Thanks for asking. And I just realized I forgot I didn't turn on my timer. My tea is going to be very strong this morning. Tell us, is there anything that folks, especially here in Atlanta, should know about to come see you in the near future?
I mean, I guess best thing is just to follow me on Instagram at Mark Kendall Comedy. And so I'll post in my stories about shows that I have coming up. So if you see something that's like, oh, that looks something that I'd want to come see, you can check that out. Outside of Atlanta, I'll be going to New York in a couple of weeks, November 4th. I'm part of this climate comedy cohort, which is a fellowship program put together by Generation 180, which is a company that does a lot of work with climate justice, as well as the Center for Media and Social Impact. And it's like this year-long program. Me and 8 other comics from around the country, we've been had these intensives on where climate science is right now, as well as hearing from behavioral scientists about how to talk about climate change in a way that's more optimistic without bumming someone out. And so we've been writing and creating content centered around the climate. And so November 4th at Caveat, which is a venue in New York, we'll be doing a variety show, and we'll be doing it in the style of a town hall. So I'll be hosting this town hall, and then you'll see different characters come up, you'll see stand-ups come up, and it's all kind of centered around the climate. So if you're in New York and you want to check that out, but otherwise, just follow me at Mark Kendall Comedy, and I'll post about the stuff that I'm doing live in Atlanta.
That is great. I do have several friends in New York, so I'll make sure that they know about that. And Mark, I just think you're the bee's knees. I'm grateful that you were able to share some time this morning, and I hope that the tea stays delicious. And
oh yeah, this is a very good cup of tea. Yeah.
Thank you so much, folks. I'll be sure to post all of Mark's social media so that you can follow him. And Mark, I'll be seeing you around 6 more times this week, I'm sure.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you, Shannon.